I think a few people have touched on this, but I would love to just start off by thanking Deborah and Michael for creating just such an inclusive community. And I was grumpy this morning. I drove up from Birmingham, Alabama, where I now live, and I had like 4 HR things to deal with. And then I rolled up and I saw so many friends and got so many hugs, and it's just such a special community to be a part of professionally and personally, and I think we're all really lucky to have Deborah and Michael as the facilitators and conveners of this sort of thing. So thank you. So let's just jump into it, if that's all right. John, you took office in Louisiana in 2012?
Yes.
Is that right? I was reading this morning about our new speaker in Washington. All of the coverage, as coverage so often does these days, uses terms like unprecedented, or the most. He's the most conservative speaker in history, which I'm not sure is true, but but just thinking back on some of what we heard about from Governor Bush and from John, the massive changes that he put in place, the sort of slings and arrows that he faced to drive those outcomes and to transform things like early literacy policy or to introduce school choice on a broader basis in Florida, I think it's oftentimes so many of us look at the broader sort of like political dynamics surrounding education, and it feels like it's, I don't know if it's approaching a crescendo, but there seems to be a heightened level of political maneuvering and sort of antipathy, polarization in and around education. Just reflecting back 2012 to the present, or even back in your time in New York. I mean, what's your take? Has the politics surrounding education changed? I'd like to ask each of you to talk about that a little bit. I hope this isn't harder for you as a current official.
We can give her some cover.
I was going to say.
There we go. Okay. First of all, Ben, you're right. This is an incredible group. It's such a diverse group, and so great to see so many old advisors and friends, and so thank you for having me. And I think the answer to your question is a categorical yes, but there is a lot of good stuff happening out there, right? I mean, Penny, every day I'm talking to your former colleagues in Texas. By the way, this state, under your leadership and under my friend Kevin Huffman's leadership and his predecessor's leadership and the person in between you guys. I mean, you guys have done amazing stuff here. But talking to your former colleagues in Texas, they're doing amazing stuff. The science of reading sweep that's come across the country is really remarkable. So in some sense, you could look at it on a kind of policy-making volume and productivity basis and say, you know what, that's all good stuff. But there is some kind of mojo that when you hear Governor Bush talking, is left the building. And I think a question that we should ask ourselves here today, and I won't talk on here at the introduction, but is what is that exactly that has been lost? Is it important to get back, and how do we get it back?
Yeah, I mean, one, echo the thanks and the ability for us to come together and engage in this type of conversation. Always fun to sit with your former boss and reflect back not just 10 years, but 20 years, in some respects 30 years. We're running into a bunch of people who've done Teach for America in this room. So you think about 30 years of a movement that has arguably produced many of us who get to do this work. Politics aside, children still wake up every day and they go to school, and their parents still believe in the social contract of what's supposed to happen in that schoolhouse. And so I don't actually spend a lot of time, it wouldn't be healthy to be thinking about the blowing winds of politics when every single day I actually have to focus on the 100,000 children that go to school in Washington, D.C. We have to bring that mojo back. So I think what is missing is looking to your left and right, red or blue. Like, some of the hardest work I've done has been sitting up late at night talking to you about how you did hard work in Tennessee. I think that narrative is not told enough because we're getting caught in the tailspins of political wind up here, and we're missing the fact that our nation's children need us to rise and meet the challenge that's in front of us right now. And it's a historic challenge. There's nothing like what it meant to close an entire school system across the country, reopen that system, get children back, and then talk about teaching and learning. And if we lose this moment, we will lose more than a generation. We potentially could lose it all.
So I won't repeat what my colleagues have said and friends have said, but what I will say is that, Tennessee, I've worked in kind of little blue, big red, and everything in between, and pre, during, and post-COVID. So the only thing that worked was to not care at all about the politics. Literally every single day, I had people on my team who just lived and breathed that. And I'm so grateful for them, because when people said, did you read the blog? And I was like, sure didn't, but you know what I did? I taught a kid to read today. And that's what you want. You want to be able to keep the focus on what matters, and that's student achievement. The thing that I'm actually most concerned about right now is the level of apathy that is just swept across public school systems, private school systems, across the country. Like, you talk to people and they're tired and they don't know what to do, or we've given up on millions of kids. And we can't actually do that. If you are too tired to do the right work, then someone else needs to come in and do it, because that child still deserves a chance. And I think we're losing so much because we're spending all of the energy in the media, social media. We're getting swept up in conversations that have nothing to do with why we're in the work. We're in the work so our kids can achieve, so they can get great jobs, support their families, be good citizens, and live good lives. Like, that's what we're trying to do here. And we've lost the relationship between the purpose of education and what we are trying to produce. And so I think the biggest thing in talking to school systems is, like, one, we have got to have a national vision of what we're trying to do here. And what we have is a checklist of things that people do every day, and they all sound cute and neat, and there's op-eds about them, but it is not a cohesive vision about how we take where we were and think about where we are trying to go in the future. We have got to have a national vision so people have direction. And without a national vision, we're just gonna have a lot of throwing things at the wall, hoping it sticks, seeing it doesn't work, and then saying, see, I told you so. And it's just a learned apathy. So getting that will be incredibly important. And I think second is, as folks are talking with school systems, especially with what we will see as massive leadership change over the next 4 years. We'll lose about 25 to 30 state chiefs in 2026 because of term limits and turnover. We're losing superintendents left and right. So if you're coming in from a private sector perspective, helping districts and states see this is a solution to a problem you have, not a solution to a problem I've identified and think is real. But this is how you do it, this is how you make it easier, but most importantly, this is how you do it for kids. Because everyone I know in school systems, they are there because they care about children. And getting that fire back is gonna be incredibly important if we're all moving together in the same direction. But politics needs, I'm in my state, so if there's anyone here, then just pretend I didn't say it. But it just doesn't matter. Just get a tougher skin, honestly.
And welcome to Penny Schwinn.
I think it's extraordinarily encouraging. As I said, I live in Alabama now. I'm a Nick Saban fan. Roll Tide. But sorry, but the know your audience. Most of these folks aren't from Bleeding Orange. But there's a seriousness in your rhetoric in what you're describing. You're not describing silver bullets. You're talking about rolling up your sleeves and getting the job done. I remember, I don't know if he's still in the room, but maybe it's like 15 or 17 years ago. I can't remember. I'm getting older, but I was watching Governor Bush speak, and he's notorious. Like, if you email him, you'll get an email back in 30 seconds at like 2 o'clock in the morning, 2:30. This is like pre-AI, really, for the most part. And you're like, how do you do it? Like, what's your system? How's your office organized? Tell me about what you do. And he's like, I got to give some remarks. I'll tell you in a minute. So he gives his remarks. I'm waiting. I have my pad, and he's like, okay, 5 words. And I get in real close, and he's like, I work my ass off.
Literally.
And it's not complicated, is it? So what should we be excited about? We hear so much, I think, in the national narrative about like what we're reacting to, about NAEP scores, about teacher shortages. We hear sort of like macro about big and historic ideas, and whether it's school choice. I'd like to come back to the science of reading. I can't do air quotes. with this in my hand. But what are you excited about? From a proactive standpoint, what are the policy or instructional strategies that you're most enthusiastic about?
So I mean, we will get back to the science of reading. So my love of literacy can be put on hold for that. But I think the thing that I'm actually most excited about is that there is, to Christina's point, this moment in time that we're in, whether we take advantage of it or not, is actually on all of us. But we are seeing this revolution, especially in technology and the appropriate and effective use of technology in all sorts of other sectors. And when we are thinking about what is possible for students with generative AI, when you think about personalized learning, when you think about stop putting labels on students and actually have them be a really meaningful, inclusive part of every single classroom, you don't actually have to label kids. They're just children in rooms who can get a great education because we've solved for a lot of the bigger challenges that any student might have through technology. And I think right now, when we look at our teacher workforce, we have very veteran teachers. We're talking 15, 20 years or more. You've got this middle group between 5 and 15 or 20 years, and you've got new teachers. And we've never seen a bigger difference in the survey data about what they know and can do, what they think is important, what they include in classrooms. So from a leadership perspective, to manage against your workforce, where folks are like, tell me more about Excel, and someone else is saying, like, I have created this entire new world where everyone, you know, it's some of our classrooms are actually very, very, I think, very cool. But every student has a little avatar, and everything's tech-based, and they're teaching right next door to each other. That is that's what's happening in public education right now. So if we have this moment in time to say, let's capture all of the innovation, all of the ideas, all of these really interesting emerging best practices that can meet every child where they are in the same classroom, and it doesn't have to look like 6 periods a day in desks facing a teacher. It doesn't even have to be in the classroom. And so how do we reimagine, without it just being rhetoric, but actually reimagine the educational and academic experience of all of our students and rethink what that can mean for outcomes? I do think this is the moment in time where education can catch up to everyone else because the money's there. I think the interest is there from a lot of folks. We just need to be able to channel it and do something productive with it.
Yeah, I want to echo Governor Bush's response. You just work, really. When people are like, oh my God, you wrote me back, I work all the time, all day long. And it's that level of urgency that we need now. Like there's no way to AI around having a strong superintendent that can manage a board and inspire families and, you know, put a Band-Aid on a child when they fall and teach a child how to read. So you actually need a committed group of individuals who want to take on this challenge and be committed to it. I think I'm excited about 3 things. One, I'm excited about our enrollment numbers because they're up 18% over the last 10 years. And so I'm excited that coming out of a pandemic, oh, thanks. It does, no, but truly, we actually have to think about that. You need to look at the enrollment trends that are existing across systems across this country. It means something that we have beat our pre-pandemic numbers for enrollment. That means that in all of these conversations, families are still choosing public and public charter options, and they're sending their children to school to learn. So I am excited about that. I'm excited about our reimagining high school work. We're not just reimagining high school in terms of like credits and seat time. We literally are reimagining the experience. So with our ESSER dollars, we launched an advanced technical center. Our students show up on a third-party location. They were on a college campus. We've now built them their own facility, but they're getting credentials in nursing and cybersecurity, like real time. These are juniors and seniors that are earning CTE credit. They're getting paid minimum wage to do it, and they're being taught by university faculty. All at the same time, they're doing that every day, first period, and then they're going to their traditional high school. So this even presses on governance. These are our traditional students, these are charter students, they're all meeting in one location, and then they're going and having the rest of their high school experience. And in one semester, these students earned over 500 credits, which equaled over $500,000 in free money, right? So I'm excited to know that if we build it, not only will the students come, but they will perform. A 97% attendance rate. So, right, whoever in the front just said, wow, right? Like, we're sitting in rooms trying to figure out, like, oh, what do we do? Build things kids want to go to and show them the path for, like, if you do this thing, you will have this credential that allows you to do 2 things. Because I'm a first-generation college grad. You need to be able to work and go to school. So we want our students to come out with a credential that allows them to, if they need to work, they can engage in the employment market in a way that makes sense for them and allows them to live their life and also get a high quality education. So I'm excited about that. Last but certainly not least, I really am excited about the conversation we are having around literacy. I'm excited that as we stood up trainings for for science of reading and letters training, teachers signed up in droves, completed the training, and we gave them stipends for doing it. And so again, pushing back the rhetoric that our teachers are tired or that they're, they don't want to meet the challenge. It's not true. No educator wakes up saying they don't want to get it right for children. We have to create the conditions, and we used a lot of technology to do it. How do you stand up high quality training for teachers that they can do it on their own time, that they can show mastery, and then we can create stipends for them at the end of that training? Every single seat was subscribed, and we're about to do it again. So like literacy investments are going to look dramatically different than what it looked like probably for us, where like when I did Readers Writers Workshop, you had to literally go and sit, and that's not what teachers need today. They need to get skilled up as fast as possible so they can get in classrooms every single day and deliver for kids. And I'm excited that now that I'm not testing children for COVID every single day, we are having those conversations, because those are mission critical to the children that we serve. Thanks.
It's good. I'm excited about both of my colleagues' good comments. I'm excited that I think the system broadly has, relative to when I took that job in January 2012, has generally recognized things that should have been recognized a long time ago and has begun to put them in practice at great scale. And these are victories, and just to say them, but Ben, I am going to caveat it with one thing I'm not excited about. The things I'm excited about. One, I've got 3 young kids, that childcare has become an issue. The affordability of childcare, the wages of childcare workers, the quality of the delivery of childcare is important. That we are back to evidence-based teaching of reading matters. That American schools are, to a large extent, not entirely as my colleagues know, but largely focused on the quality of curriculum materials as a factor in a kid's education matters. That we're not thinking of the high school degree or even the bachelor's degree as having a hegemony in the way we define success matters. Those are things that weren't thought of in 2012, should have been thought of a long time ago. That they're accepted norms in a way now is positive. The problem is, and as good as I felt like my colleagues in the commercial world were here earlier before Governor Bush's presentation, we didn't really get at the fact that this is a regulated business. And so while I totally endorse Penny's perspective on how you do the job when you're a state chief, which is put the politics to the side, you want the politics at your back. If the regulators don't recognize the things that are of value and evolve the policy environment to encourage value creation, we have a problem, because this is not a commercially driven business. We might want it to be. We might want it to be more dynamic. We might support education savings account, but the truth of it is 90% of the kids are in a heavily regulated environment, and the regulatory environment has been static for 20 years. The regulatory environment has caught up with nothing that I just said, notwithstanding all of the AI rhetoric and earnest, good discussion we've had today. That is a fundamental problem, and what it indicates is that the politics are having, whether you're red or blue, conservative, liberal, whatever, a stunting effect on the evolution of our industry and on the evolution of what we're doing for kids, and that I am deeply concerned about.
That didn't get any claps. I don't know if Josh Reibel and Larry Berger are still in the room, but I remember a presentation I think I did with those guys back in, 2006 or 7, and Larry, they had been presenting to state chiefs. Like, we're presenting to departments of ed, and they all love our stuff. They think it's really cool. They think it will be really impactful. They think it will make a difference. But like, adoption is just lagging, and we're getting ground down, and like, people don't really know how to buy it. And the title of the presentation was like, the state superintendent is not your customer. Like, the legislature might be your customer, the governor's office might be your customer, but to your point, there's so many actors across the educational system, this super fragmented, often politicized, publicly funded system, are enacting public policy. And the pace of policy change is infinitely slower than the pace of technological change, or even shifts in our sort of understanding of evidence and of research. Literacy is now different. I'll just throw out kind of like a straw man. We get tons of calls on this these days, and it's really funny. I'm sure there are a bunch of private equity people in the room, and they call and they say, like, let's talk about the science of reading market. Who are the players in the science of reading market? And so, like, after my head explodes, then we sort of like we'll talk it through. But I guess my question is, like, is there anything now that's like really different? Like I remember, and I was old as John Hage, but 2000, President Bush gets elected. We have the National Reading Panel. There's sort of like consensus. The Bush administration, in ways that people thought, I think, were too heavy-handed at the time, pushed the inclusion of phonics, right? And there was this like recoil, this like rejection of this conservative literacy agenda that, ironically, maybe thanks to some New York Times coverage in a podcast, is now becoming more of a progressive or mainstream agenda. Like, has anything really changed in that, or is it just that this is one of those issues where maybe there's greater consensus that's now informing policy and practice? Like, what's different and what's happening from the science of reading standpoint that you're excited about?
So, a couple of things. So I think, yes, it is different. The way a child learns to read has not fundamentally changed. And so we focus so much on the phonics side of the conversation that it becomes, well, we do this, we do this. I want to give a lot of credit because Louisiana put at the forefront, when John was there, knowledge building. And so it's not just can you read the words, but do you understand what they mean, and can you actually process that text and then be able to have conversations and use them, et cetera. And so that is a huge shift in thinking, that it has to be, I can read Spanish and French relatively fluently. It doesn't mean I know what I'm reading. I just understand how to create, how to respond to those sounds and read it fluently, but I don't know the vocab. So I think John did incredible work on what we call HQIM, or high quality instructional materials. So that's been a major shift. I think another shift is that it is not just about having the student in front of you and then teaching them letters make sounds, and you put the sounds together and then you read the words. Like that's great. But our students are different. The context in which they come to school have changed dramatically. And so in order to have an effective, full science of reading, however anyone defines that program, is you have to be able to have high quality materials, both kind of in phonics and phonemic and awareness all the way to knowledge building. You have to actually have a strategy, not just to give teachers training and have a sit and get, and then they magically know how to do something, but you have to get ed prep programs to actually teach it correctly, which can be very, very difficult. There are lots of great folks doing that, but not close to enough. You then have to give teachers real-time instructional support throughout the year, coaching. Go back to something more like the medical model, where it's you're actually giving people real-time feedback and coaching. You're helping them to do better. You're meeting kids where they are, and then you're going back and supporting them. You have to include families. I think we've divorced that way too much, but families need to have the same instructional materials that are happening in the classroom, and they need to have the support to know how to use those materials. In Tennessee, what we did was this Reading 360 program. There were 3 states on NAEP, or on the latest state assessments that came out, that are back to pre-pandemic levels or higher, but that's 3. That is not nearly enough. And what I attribute the work in Tennessee to was not the state, actually. It was the districts who were doing walkthroughs with each other. It was parents who were getting decodables that matched the instructional materials in the classroom, and then were reading those decodables to kids at night with videos to help them know what to do. It was a mascot, this bleepity bleep raccoon named Riley, who I love, and I was Riley just the one time, but you going into classrooms and getting people excited, and then everyone wants to be part of Riley. It is no different than any marketing campaign for any other company, right? It is about getting social media clicks. It's about getting other users to recommend the product. It's about knowing that your product is good. Those are all the same things that are happening in literacy. I think what is different is we just made it about a classroom and a teacher before, and it's a much bigger conversation. And the only other thing I will say on that is, my fear is it is like a fad, and that it's going to run out in 2 or 3 years, and everyone's going to say, well, the next thing we're going to do is math, and then we're going to do something else. You have to be able to do a lot of things at once, but the single thing that we cannot get wrong is teaching a child to read. Because no matter how much technology comes into our homes, our lives, our classrooms, or our workspaces, kids are always going to need to know how to read, period. And in this country, 2/3 of our students do not know how to do that proficiently. And that's ridiculous. And I think if we are shaming ourselves on anything, it is a belief that kids cannot learn how to read. They can. Every single kid can learn how to read. You just have to figure out how to do it. And second is making the economic argument that if we do not have students who can read on grade level, not by third grade, by first grade. Third grade's like the last call. You need to have it earlier. If we do not have every single student reading on grade level, we have done them a disservice that is immeasurable from their own kind of thriving as adults, their own economic opportunities, but certainly as human beings, we have lost the moral imperative on what we're trying to do in education. So it has got to stay at the forefront, and there are lots of ways to approach that, but it has to be every single person who touches a child's life for it to work.
Can I just throw in on that? That is such a good point. And let me just add a coda to it, because I want to illustrate my view on the political malaise. And a cynical view here is that we all work flush with cash. The government was stroking checks and needed good places. Politicians on both sides of the aisle are having a hard time finding legislation to attach to that doesn't get them killed on Facebook.
Right.
So they love this. Copycat legislation across the country, 32 states, right? Some state chiefs, mainly these two, take it seriously, out there working with districts to make it happen. But in many, there's a question as to how weak that T is. And why? Partially because we didn't do the hardest policy of all in Congress or in state capitals, which is actually hold anybody accountable for the moral imperative you're describing. And so if you need to understand the dynamic today politically, it's embodied in that idea. Lots of money, nice idea, everybody's in favor, but no one really willing to embody the moral imperative like George W. Bush did, however long ago, and actually say, and we're going to be responsible for it. This is a regulated system. It is a public utility. If you don't change the regulations and the long-term incentives for the operators, you can't earnestly change the practice.
Yeah, well said, really well said. And I would, we won't have time to cover, I'm deciding between like assessment and accountability and funding, but I'm going to go with funding. So Christina, you referenced like we're in a moment, like there's money in the system. Just to put it in perspective for folks, like if you remember the Race to the Top program, it was like roughly like I think like $5 billion. So across the 3 stimulus bills, $190 billion, right? So call that, this is my like back of the napkin, $190 billion over 5 years. Which is like if you think about the allocation towards like instruction, the things we think about as education, maybe it's like 30 or 40%, which is just less than Title I, right? So the way that I think about it, it's like having a dual income household for the last 5 years and then shifting over to a single income household where the second earner that's, income that's going away is a little bit smaller. So it's a huge amount of money's been pumped into the system. A huge amount of money's about to evaporate from the system. So just maybe to talk a little bit about how you think about that from the standpoint of your, of a school district, or maybe what your peers also maybe are thinking about the significance of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much color that we miss when people generally say like, oh, there was a historic amount of money. 2 things. One, the premise of the money was to tackle what I call my microscopic enemy, which I call affectionately COVID. So we should be grounded in that the money wasn't pumped into the system because it was just like a great day in America, right? Our entire school system. No, I mean, it's really important because I think you too, will rage at all of the people who will have lots of opinions around what happened with the money, how was it spent, et cetera, et cetera. Everyone just close your eyes. Let's go back to March of 2020. Because in my 20 years of education, I never sent children home and didn't see them for 2 years. So I came from Philadelphia. Most people don't know that. For a year and a half in Philadelphia, I ran an entire school system in my living room. And we had to wear masks in order, like we made a list of like, well, what happens if this person passes away? And then what happens if this person? And then I want to be grounded in, particularly in this room, as we all go back to our homes and we talk about what happened with all of the money. So round 1 was, how do you reopen a public education system? How do you test for COVID? How do you set outdoor classrooms? How do you do air filtration? I now feel like I should easily say I'm an epidemiologist because I know more about how to fight infectious diseases than I think I should know, or more importantly, our children should know. So like phase 1, how do you reopen a public education system? In the face of politics, I've only received death threats in my entire career over a mask, not any other political decision. But the decision on can we, and this is in DC, so this isn't, so, play it out in all your context. But like, I just want to go back in time. The first set, or priority number one, was reopen the schools. Because we knew that there was nothing good about children staying home for 2 years, regardless of where they were raised, regardless of who their parents are. So phase one on the rhetoric, let's get children back to school. Then let's figure out how we keep them safe. How do we deal with social emotional learning? How do we control for the fact that ninth graders are being expected to act like ninth graders, but they didn't have middle school? So let's just put all that aside. And now let's engage in assessment, academic recovery, teaching and learning, science and reading, et cetera. And so I think it's important, as we talk about the fiscal cliff and all of those things, to ground ourselves. This wasn't a gift from America where they finally realized the importance of public education and they now wanted to make it right. A lot of systems across this country, DC not one of them, spent most of their funding just on deferred maintenance. Because on the first time in 100 years, they had enough money to fix roofs and clear out asbestos and make sure that children had safe buildings to walk into. We were quite fortunate in DC to set up accelerated learning models. We have a $40 million high-impact tutoring investment. We did a huge literacy investment around high-quality instructional materials. We are fortunate that we were able to use a lot of our ESSER funding on accelerated learning. That is why 2 years of assessment results show we now have the same increases in proficiency that we had prior to the pandemic. We still have a long way to go, but it's evidence that accelerated learning works. We're going to release our growth data soon, and we can literally see, we can target where we use high-impact tutoring, and we can see the performance of our students that are letting us know that like academic recovery can happen and accelerated learning is important and can happen. But that's true for DC. That's not true for all across the country. I think to your question around the fiscal cliff, we right-sized our budgets last year and we're doing it again this year. And the goal is to ensure that the cliff doesn't decimate our system. But again, that isn't a system like DC where we were clear about what this one-time infusion would mean. We leveraged those resources in ways that we were only spending one-time money because we knew that many things would not be able to be sustained beyond the pandemic. But I can tell you, and many of you sitting in this room, and I feel like John would agree, that's not true across the country. Across the country, after the end of next year, there are going to be really challenged systems that I think are going to play out along the lines of the neediest systems being impacted the most at that infusion being pulled away, and I don't think we're going to get it again. So if you're like, what concerns you the most? I don't think America's going to write us another check in public education. They should, if we care deeply about the fact that our children cannot read in the third grade. But I don't think the politics are going to get us there.
On that note,
sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, children.
We've got a couple minutes. If anyone's got a question, throw your hand up. Maybe you were going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, for a plug, since you were going to do it, we need to get back to strong accountability on student outcomes and on dollars, period.
Yeah.
We've moved away from it. It has to come back. It just has to come back.
Agreed.
Yeah. So are we at can we get any lower in terms of accountability in the system?
I think people are afraid to measure what matters right now because we have a lot of excuses as to why we've dropped so much. And I just believe you measure what matters, you report on it. Parents deserve to know how their kids are doing without seeing just grade inflation. And we've become so afraid of just telling the truth because of the politics, because you get slammed, people lose their jobs, there are consequences. But ultimately, we have 2 states in math and 3 states in English language arts that have gotten to pre-pandemic levels. And I just don't think that's acceptable because if those are my kids, I've got 3 young kids. Like, yeah, they've got 2 educators at home, and so we're doing all of our own stuff. But ultimately, we have to be honest with families, and we have to provide options and choices so kids can thrive. Parents can't make those choices if they don't have the information, and it's just critical. And I think we've moved so far away from accountability that we've lost the ability as a country to be able to measure what matters, do what's right for kids, even when it's hard, and especially when it's hard. Yeah. So I just didn't want to lose that because I know you said we were going to skip over it.
No, I'd snap that one if I could too. Was there a question?
Hi. One of the ways that
Speaking of DC public schools.
Speaking of DC.
Can you introduce
Who are
yourself
you again?
and tell us what your background is?
Can you tell us who you are and what you've done?
Good afternoon,
Madam Chancellor.
My name's Kaya Henderson. I used to be the Chancellor of DC Public Schools.
Woo!
Thanks. Now I do all kinds of other things. But my question for you is, I think a lot of times in the education space, we expect that change only happens from the top down. And what I think lots of us have seen is the top can do what it does when the bottom is creating demand for the kinds of policy changes that you're talking about. So I would love to hear, I think Penny said very eloquently, there is not a vision, not just at the national level, at many state levels, at many local levels. How do we engage students, parents, community members in helping to create the demand that we need to allow you to be the bold leaders that you are at the state level?
There's a lot to say about that. And good to see you. I would say, let's talk about accountability sort of as a de facto issue. Why was there the creation of an accountability system before? In other words, the politics notwithstanding, why was the institution of the state governments and the federal governments able to say, we're going to measure learning, we're going to say the buck stops here in some sense? It's because there were pressures from both sides of the aisle, coalitions that were unlikely, that encouraged politicians to say there is a safe space here for you to do the right thing. And I would say today, education is not a leader on politics. Education is a function of politics. And you have two political ideologies, neither one of which takes the same level of institutional responsibility you may have seen 30 years ago. And so the political space is void. So I think the question is, in some sense, what can we do, as we'll call ourselves national leaders, to foment an environment where those coalitions start to reform? And I would say that I believe those will be issue-based politics. In other words, I think that as in the past where you had kind of pro-business cold warriors and you had civil rights advocates on the left coming together to see common ground, I think it will likely be, if it does come to pass, issue-based groups forming unlikely coalitions. But there does need to be a venue in which it is safe for those groups to get together. And when you think about 30 years ago, it was common and de rigueur for philanthropies, for example, to play the role of convening unlikely partners to talk long-term about big issues. And I think that space has been ceded. So I throw that out there as one idea where I don't think we will create the right political conditions to give politicians the right venue, the right space to be safe and do the right thing, in the absence of that kind of long-term planning and formation of coalitions in ways that I don't see as common practice in the social sector these days.
I think we're at time. I could facilitate this conversation
We can
for
keep
hours.
going. I was just getting started.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Deborah and Michael.
Thank you.